Have you ever heard a story so incredible that you thought it couldn't possibly be true? A tale so extraordinary that it seems like something out of a Hollywood movie rather than real life? Well, what if I told you that one man lived a life that was more unbelievable than any script ever written? A life filled with Olympic glory, Hollywood stardom, death-defying stunts, a world-famous yell that literally saved his life, and achievements that no one has ever been able to replicate. This is the story of Johnny Weissmuller, and trust me, you won't believe what you're about to discover. By the end of this video, you'll understand why his legend continues to captivate people nearly a century later, and why the stories about him seem too fantastic to be real until the evidence proved otherwise. Picture this. It's a humid evening in Cuba, sometime in the late 1950s. The island nation is in the middle of a violent revolution, with Fidel Castro's guerrilla fighters battling against the government. Armed rebels are everywhere, suspicious of foreigners, ready to kidnap or kill anyone who might be connected to the regime they're fighting against. On a luxurious golf course, far from the chaos but not far enough, a group of wealthy tourists are enjoying what they think is a safe afternoon round of golf. Suddenly, their golf cart is surrounded by armed revolutionaries, rifles pointed directly at them. The tourists freeze in terror. None of them speak Spanish. The rebels don't speak English. The tension is suffocating. Any wrong move could be fatal. One of the men in the cart knows he has seconds to do something, anything, to change the situation. So he does something that sounds absolutely insane. He stands up, beats his chest with both fists, throws his head back, and unleashes a sound that echoes across the golf course, the unmistakable Tarzan yell. For a moment, everything stops. The rebels look confused, then shocked, then their faces break into huge smiles. They lower their weapons and start laughing and cheering. They recognize him. They know exactly who he is. That man was Johnny Weissmuller, and his iconic yell had just saved his life and the lives of his friends. The rebels escorted them safely off the golf course, thrilled to have encountered the legendary Tarzan himself. It's a story that sounds too perfect, too Hollywood to be true. But it happened, and it's just one of many unbelievable stories from the life of this extraordinary man. Johnny Weissmuller wasn't even supposed to exist in America, at least not officially. He was born on June 2, 1904, as Janos Peter Weissmuller, in Freidorf, Romania, which was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His parents were German, and they decided to seek a better life in America when Johnny was just a baby. They settled in Pennsylvania, then later moved to Chicago, Illinois, where Johnny would grow up. But here's where the story gets interesting, and where one of the first unbelievable elements comes in. When Johnny later competed in the Olympics, there were questions about his eligibility. You see, to represent the United States in the Olympics, you had to be an American citizen. Johnny's birth records from Romania would have disqualified him. So what happened? His brother provided an affidavit claiming Johnny was actually born in Windber, Pennsylvania, not Romania. Whether this was true or a convenient fabrication to protect his Olympic dreams remains a mystery to this day. What we do know is that Johnny Weissmuller became one of America's greatest heroes, regardless of exactly where he drew his first breath. And if you think that's unbelievable, just wait until you hear what he accomplished in the water. Johnny's relationship with swimming started out of necessity, not ambition. As a child in Chicago, he suffered from various ailments and health issues. A doctor recommended swimming as therapy to strengthen his body. The young Johnny started spending time at the public pools and beaches of Chicago, and something magical happened. He didn't just get healthy. He became phenomenal. By his teenage years, it was clear that Johnny Weissmuller wasn't just a good swimmer. He was something the world had never seen before. His coach, Bill Bachrach, recognized this immediately and began training him with an intensity and focus that would revolutionize competitive swimming. Bachrach developed new training methods specifically for Johnny, focusing on a revolutionary freestyle technique that emphasized a powerful 6-beat kick, high body position in the water, and explosive arm strokes. Johnny was a natural athlete with the perfect body for swimming. 6 feet 3 inches tall, with a barrel chest, narrow hips, and size 12 feet that acted like natural flippers. But it was his work ethic combined with this natural talent that created something unprecedented. On August 6, 1921, at just 17 years old, Johnny Weissmuller made his competitive swimming debut. What happened next launched one of the most dominant athletic careers in history. Over the next 10 years, Johnny would compete in countless races at every distance from 50 yards to half a mile. He would set 67 world records. Let me repeat that, 67 world records. He won 52 United States national championships. He won 5 Olympic gold medals and 1 bronze medal. But here's the part that truly seems impossible, the achievement that made people think the stories about him must be exaggerated or false. Johnny Weissmuller never lost a single race in his entire amateur swimming career. Not one. From his debut in 1921 until his retirement from competitive swimming in 1929, Johnny entered hundreds of races and won every single one. Think about that for a moment. In any sport, at any level, going undefeated for 8 to 10 years is virtually impossible. Athletes have bad days. They get sick. They face competitors who have a career-best performance. Equipment fails. Something goes wrong. But not for Johnny Weissmuller. He was so dominant, so far ahead of everyone else, that for nearly a decade he was essentially unbeatable. When people hear this stat today, they often don't believe it. They think it must be an exaggeration, or that maybe he only competed against weak competition. But the records don't lie, and neither do the newspapers from that era, which documented his incredible winning streak with amazement. His Olympic performances were the stuff of legend. At the 1924 Paris Olympics, Johnny competed in his first games at age 20. He won gold in the 100-meter freestyle, gold in the 400-meter freestyle, and gold as part of the 4x200-meter relay team. He also won a bronze medal in water polo, just for good measure. His dominance wasn't just about winning. It was about how much he won by. In the 100-meter freestyle final, he didn't just touch the wall first. He absolutely destroyed the competition, setting a new Olympic record. For years later, at the 1928 Amsterdam Olympics, Johnny returned even stronger. He successfully defended his 100-meter freestyle title, setting another Olympic record. He also led the American team to another gold medal in the 4x200-meter relay. By the time he retired from amateur competition, Johnny had cemented himself as not just the greatest swimmer of his generation, but arguably the greatest swimmer the world had ever seen up to that point. In 1950, the Associated Press voted him the greatest swimmer of the first half of the 20th century. His records would stand for years, and his impact on the sport would last forever. But perhaps Johnny's most significant achievement was one specific swim that changed swimming forever. On July 9, 1922, at a pool in Neptune Beach, California, Johnny Weissmuller became the first human being in history to swim 100 meters in under 1 minute. He clocked in at 58.6 seconds, shattering the 1-minute barrier that had seemed impossible to break. To put this in perspective, this was like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile, or Usain Bolt running the 100 meters in under 9.6 seconds. It was a barrier that defined the sport, and Johnny destroyed it. Just a year after he started competing, he had already rewritten what was considered humanly possible. Then, on March 6, 1923, he became the first person to swim 400 meters in under 5 minutes, clocking 4 minutes and 57 seconds. These weren't just records. They were revolutionary moments that changed how people thought about human athletic potential. The question everyone asks is, how did he do it? How did one man dominate so completely that he literally never lost? The answer lies in a combination of factors. First, his physical gifts were extraordinary. His body was perfectly designed for swimming, with that massive chest providing incredible lung capacity, his long arms giving him a huge reach, and those large feet providing propulsion. Second, his technique was revolutionary. His coach, Bill Backrack, developed a freestyle stroke that was more efficient and powerful than anything that had come before. Johnny's high body position reduced drag, his 6-beat kick provided constant propulsion, and his breathing technique was perfectly timed. Third, and perhaps most importantly, was his mental toughness. Johnny had an unshakable belief in himself and an iron will to win. He trained harder than anyone else, pushing his body to limits that others wouldn't dare approach. He studied his races, analyzed his competition, and entered the water with the absolute certainty that he would win. And he always did. But here's where Johnny Weissmuller's story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. At the height of his swimming fame, with the world at his feet and opportunities everywhere, Johnny made a decision that would define the rest of his life and make him even more famous than his Olympic triumphs ever could. He decided to become an actor. Now, you might think that this was a natural transition, that a famous athlete could easily slide into Hollywood. But remember, this was the early 1930s. There was no established path from athletic stardom to movie stardom. Most Olympic athletes of that era faded into obscurity after their competing days were over. They got normal jobs, lived normal lives, and were forgotten by all but the most dedicated sports historians. Johnny could have taken a comfortable position as a swimming coach, or worked in business trading on his famous name, and lived a pleasant, quiet life. Instead, he gambled everything on a role that seemed almost too perfect: Tarzan, the Lord of the Jungle. The story of how Johnny became Tarzan is fascinating in itself. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios was looking for someone to play the lead role in their new adaptation of Edgar Rice Burroughs' jungle adventure novels. They needed someone who looked like Tarzan, incredibly muscular, athletic, comfortable in minimal clothing, and able to perform the physical demands of the role. They also needed someone with charisma, someone the camera would love. Various actors were considered, but none quite fit the bill. Then someone suggested Johnny Weissmuller, the Olympic swimming champion. MGM executives were skeptical. Johnny wasn't an actor. He had no training, no experience. Could an athlete really carry a major motion picture? They brought Johnny in for a screen test, and everything changed. The camera absolutely loved him. His physical presence was overwhelming. His muscular physique was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. His face had a rough handsomeness that worked perfectly for the character. And despite having no acting training, he had a natural charisma that translated beautifully to film. MGM offered him the role, and in 1932, Tarzan the Ape Man was released to enormous success. What made Johnny's Tarzan so special? Why did he become the definitive version of the character, the one that people still reference today? There were other Tarzan actors before him and many after him, but none captured the role quite like Johnny Weissmuller. First and foremost was his physicality. Johnny didn't need stunt doubles for the swimming scenes or the athletic feats. He could actually do everything that Tarzan was supposed to do. When you watched Johnny swim through crocodile-infested waters, dive off cliffs, or swing from vines, you were watching real athletic ability, not movie magic. This authenticity came through on screen and made the character believable in a way that other portrayals weren't. Second was his comfort in the role. Johnny spent years in swimming trunks in front of crowds of thousands at Olympic competitions. Wearing minimal clothing on camera didn't faze him at all. He moved with natural confidence that other actors, who were uncomfortable being so exposed, couldn't match. Third, and this is huge, was the Tarzan yell. The Tarzan yell that Johnny created became one of the most recognizable sounds in movie history. It's been trademarked, it's been studied, it's been imitated millions of times, but no one has ever quite been able to replicate it. The story of how the yell was created is shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts, which makes it even more fascinating. The official MGM studio version claimed that sound recordist Douglas Shearer created the yell by combining multiple sounds: Johnny's voice, a hyena's howl played backward, a camel's bleat, the pluck of a violin string, and a soprano's high C. This makes for a great Hollywood story, and it explained how they got that distinctive, otherworldly quality. However, Johnny himself always maintained that he created the yell himself, inspired by the yodeling of his German neighbors in Chicago, combined with his own powerful voice. His co-star, Maureen O'Sullivan, who played Jane, supported Johnny's version throughout her life. She insisted that she heard him do the yell live on set without any technical assistance. So what's the truth? We'll probably never know for certain. What we do know is that the sound became iconic, and whether it was all Johnny or a blend of sounds, it was intimately connected to him and his portrayal of Tarzan. Between 1932 and 1948, Johnny made 12 Tarzan films, 6 with MGM and 6 with RKO. These films were enormously popular and made Johnny one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Children everywhere idolized him. Adults were captivated by the exotic jungle adventures. The movies were shown around the globe, making Johnny Weissmuller an international superstar. His fame from the Tarzan films eclipsed even his Olympic achievements. Generations of people who had no idea he was an Olympic champion knew him as Tarzan. The role defined him, and in many ways he became inseparable from the character. Even decades after his last Tarzan film, people would recognize him and ask him to do the yell. Sometimes he would oblige, and that unmistakable sound would ring out, bringing smiles to everyone who heard it. But being Tarzan wasn't just about swinging on vines and yelling. Johnny performed stunts that were absolutely insane by today's standards, and definitely by the standards of the 1930s. Remember, This was long before modern safety equipment, trained stunt coordinators, and CGI. If you wanted Tarzan to ride a rhinoceros on screen, you had to put the actor on an actual rhinoceros. And that's exactly what Johnny did. In Tarzan and His Mate, released in 1934, Johnny performed some of the most dangerous stunts ever filmed. He rode a black rhinoceros, an animal known for being aggressive and unpredictable. The rhino, named Mary, had been imported from the Hagenbeck Zoo in Hamburg, Germany specifically for the film. Riding a rhino is extraordinarily dangerous. These animals can weigh over 2,000 pounds, can run up to 30 miles per hour, and have incredibly poor eyesight, which makes them likely to charge unexpectedly. But Johnny climbed on and rode it for the cameras. He also rode an elephant and a hippopotamus in various scenes. Hippos, despite their cute reputation, are actually one of the most dangerous animals in Africa, responsible for more human deaths than almost any other large animal. They're territorial, aggressive, and have massive jaws that can crush a human with ease. Johnny rode one. For the cameras. Without a stunt double. The underwater scenes were particularly impressive because this was Johnny's realm. He could hold his breath for minutes at a time, dive to impressive depths, and move through the water with a grace that made him look superhuman. The fight scenes he filmed underwater, battling alligators and other dangers, were real in a way that's hard to imagine today. There were certainly some movie tricks and specially trained animals, but Johnny was actually in the water with these creatures, actually swimming, actually interacting with them physically. Modern actors work with green screens and have everything added in post-production. Johnny worked with real animals in real jungles and on real soundstages with real water and real danger. He suffered numerous injuries over the years, bites, scratches, bruises, near drownings. But he kept doing his own stunts because that's who he was. He wasn't afraid, and his physical abilities meant he could do things that stuntmen couldn't do as well. Johnny's personal life was as dramatic as any of his films. He was married 5 times, and each marriage told a different story about this complex man. His first wife was Bob Arnst, a band singer and club performer. They married in 1931 and divorced in 1933. It was a brief marriage that ended as Johnny's fame was beginning to skyrocket. His second marriage was to the fiery Mexican actress Lupe Velez, known as the Mexican Spitfire. They married in 1933 in Las Vegas, and their relationship was legendary for all the wrong reasons. They fought constantly and publicly. Their arguments were explosive and sometimes physical. Hollywood gossip columns had a field day with their battles. Esther Williams, the famous swimmer and actress who knew both Johnny and Lupe, wrote in her autobiography about some of Johnny's behavior that raised eyebrows even by Hollywood standards. The marriage to Lupe lasted until 1939 and was reportedly as passionate as it was tumultuous. Both were strong personalities. Both were used to being the center of attention, and neither was particularly good at compromise. Johnny's third wife was Beryl Scott, whom he married in 1939, just days after his divorce from Lupe Velez was finalized. This marriage lasted until 1948 and produced 3 children. It seemed more stable than his previous marriages, but ultimately, it too ended in divorce. His fourth marriage was to Aline Gates in 1948. This marriage lasted 14 years until 1962, making it his longest up to that point. They had 1 child together. Finally, in 1963, Johnny married Maria Gertrude Baumann. She was 42 years old and had lost 2 husbands in World War II. This marriage would last until Johnny's death, making it his final and ultimately his most enduring relationship. The pattern of multiple marriages wasn't unusual in Hollywood, but it does reveal something about Johnny. He was searching for something, some kind of stability or happiness that seemed to elude him despite all his fame and success. As Johnny aged, his career transitioned. After his last Tarzan film in 1948, he continued acting, playing a similar character named Jungle Jim in a series of films and later in a television series that ran from 1955 to 1956. The Jungle Jim character was basically Tarzan with clothes and more dialogue, and it allowed Johnny to continue working in a familiar genre. However, as the 1960s arrived, Johnny found himself less in demand. The style of action-adventure films was changing, and there were younger actors taking the roles that might once have gone to him. Johnny struggled with the transition from superstar to has-been. His multiple divorces had been expensive. Hollywood wasn't calling anymore. The man who had been on top of the world, both as an Olympic champion and a movie star, was facing an uncertain future. The story of Johnny Weissmuller's later years is heartbreaking in many ways, but it also contains moments of dignity and poignancy that reveal the man behind the legend. By the 1970s, Johnny's health was declining. He suffered from various ailments related to aging, and eventually, he began showing signs of dementia, possibly Alzheimer's disease. His final years were spent in Acapulco, Mexico, ironically near the location where he had filmed his last Tarzan movie decades earlier. He lived in care facilities and later in a retirement home. Reports from this time paint a picture that is both sad and strangely beautiful. Staff and residents reported that Johnny, even in his confused mental state, would sometimes give out the Tarzan yell. Imagine being a nurse or a resident in this facility and suddenly hearing that famous sound echoing through the halls in the middle of the night. Some reports said it scared people at first, but once they understood who was making the sound and why, it became something else, a haunting reminder of glory days, a connection to a time when this confused elderly man was the strongest, fastest, most famous person in the world. Johnny Weissmuller died on January 20th, 1984, at the age of 79. As his body was lowered into the ground at Valle de la Luz Cemetery in Acapulco, something extraordinary happened. A recording of the Tarzan yell was played 3 times over the speakers. It was a final tribute to the man who had created that sound, the man who had embodied a character so completely that they became inseparable. Those who were present said it was one of the most moving moments they had ever experienced, hearing that powerful, defiant, joyful sound one last time as they said goodbye to the man who had given it to the world. Even in death, Johnny Weissmuller was Tarzan. But the story doesn't end there, because Johnny's legacy extends far beyond his personal achievements. He revolutionized competitive swimming in ways that are still felt today. The techniques that he and his coach developed became the foundation for modern freestyle swimming. Every swimmer who gets in a pool today is using methods that can be traced back to Johnny Weissmuller. His dominance inspired generations of athletes to push themselves harder, to believe that barriers were meant to be broken. When people say a record is unbreakable, swimmers remember Johnny going undefeated for a decade and setting 67 world records, and they realize that with enough dedication and talent, anything is possible. In Hollywood, Johnny proved that athletes could become actors, that crossover success was possible. He paved the way for countless athletes who came after him, from Jim Brown to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, from Arnold Schwarzenegger to John Cena. Every time an athlete successfully transitions to acting, they're following a path that Johnny Weissmuller pioneered. He showed that charisma, screen presence, and physical ability could compensate for a lack of formal acting training. He proved that audiences wanted to see real athletes doing real stunts, not just actors pretending. The action movie genre owes a tremendous debt to Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan films. The character of Tarzan itself was transformed by Johnny's portrayal. Before Johnny, Tarzan had been played by various actors in silent films, but none had made a lasting impact. Johnny's version became the definitive interpretation. When people think of Tarzan, they think of Johnny Weissmuller. His image, muscular, tanned in a loincloth swinging through the trees, became the archetype. Every Tarzan that came after was compared to Johnny, and most were found wanting. Actors like Lex Barker, Gordon Scott, Ron Ely, and even more recent versions have all been measured against the standard that Johnny set. Some have been good, some have been terrible, but none have replaced Johnny in the cultural consciousness. He is Tarzan, and that's a legacy that will last as long as people watch movies. Now let's return to some of those unbelievable stories and examine why they seemed impossible, but were actually true. The Cuba incident with the revolutionaries and the Tarzan yell. This story was confirmed by multiple sources, including Johnny's own son in his memoir Tarzan, My Father. The details might vary slightly depending on who's telling it, but the core facts are consistent. Johnny was in Cuba during the revolution. His group was surrounded by Castro's rebels, and the Tarzan yell really did save them. The rebels had grown up watching Tarzan movies. Johnny Weissmuller was a hero to them, a symbol of strength and freedom. When they realized who he was, any suspicion or hostility evaporated instantly. They were honored to meet him. It's one of those stranger-than-fiction moments that could only happen to someone whose fame had transcended borders, languages, and even political ideology. The claim that Johnny never lost a race in his entire amateur career has been verified by swimming historians who have combed through decade-old records and newspaper archives. There are no records of Johnny Weissmuller finishing second, third, or anywhere but first place in any official race from 1921 to 1929. Some skeptics have suggested that maybe he avoided certain competitions where he might face tough rivals, but that theory doesn't hold up. Johnny regularly competed against the best swimmers in the world at national championships, Olympic trials, and the Olympic Games themselves. He faced the strongest possible competition, and he beat them all, every single time. It's not just unprecedented, it's a record that will almost certainly never be matched. Modern swimming is too competitive, too international, with too many strong programs producing elite swimmers. For one person to dominate so completely for so long is essentially impossible today, which makes Johnny's achievement even more remarkable. The story of riding the rhinoceros, elephant, and hippopotamus is documented in production notes and in interviews with cast and crew from the Tarzan films. There are behind-the-scenes photographs showing Johnny with these animals. Movie historians have verified that these stunts really happened, and they've expressed amazement that anyone would attempt them, much less that the studios would allow their star to take such risks. But this was a different era in Hollywood. Safety regulations were minimal. Insurance companies weren't dictating what actors could and couldn't do. If a director wanted a shot of Tarzan riding a rhino, and the actor was willing to do it, they filmed it. The fact that Johnny survived all these stunts without serious injury is either a testament to his athletic ability and quick reflexes, or he was incredibly lucky, or perhaps both. Even the multiple marriages, which might seem exaggerated, are fully documented in public records. Marriage certificates, divorce decrees, birth certificates of children. It's all there. Johnny really did marry 5 times, and each marriage had its own dramatic arc worthy of a soap opera. The passionate, violent relationship with Lupe Velez has been documented in numerous biographies and Hollywood histories. Their fights were witnessed by friends, neighbors, and sometimes even the police. It wasn't just gossip, it was reality, and it was spectacular. What about the end of his life? Doing the Tarzan yell in the nursing home. This detail appears in multiple biographies and was confirmed by people who worked at the care facilities where Johnny lived. It wasn't constant, and reports vary on how often it happened, but it definitely occurred. Some accounts say he would do it in moments of confusion or agitation, perhaps his mind returning to a time when that yell represented power and freedom. Other accounts suggest he sometimes did it playfully, showing that even in the grip of dementia, Johnny retained some sense of who he had been. Either way, it's a powerful and moving image. The greatest swimmer in the world, the most famous Tarzan, reduced by age and illness, but still capable of producing that distinctive sound that had defined so much of his life. So why did people not believe these stories? Why did they seem too good to be true? Part of it is simply that Johnny's life was so extraordinary that it stretched credibility. One man being the greatest swimmer ever, and becoming the most famous Tarzan, and never losing a race and performing death-defying stunts, and being saved by his famous yell from revolutionary guerrillas. It's too much. It's like someone won the lottery 5 times in a row. Statistically possible, but so unlikely that you'd assume the story was false. But Johnny Weissmuller's life was that improbable collection of extraordinary achievements and experiences. Another reason people doubted the stories is that as time passed, Johnny became almost mythological. People who only knew him from old Tarzan movies on late-night television, which by the 1970s and 80s looked quite dated and campy, couldn't imagine that this actor had once been the greatest athlete in the world. Young people hearing about his undefeated record would assume it was an exaggeration because nothing in their experience suggested such dominance was possible. The Olympic swimming they watched on television showed races decided by hundredths of a second, with multiple swimmers capable of winning any given race. The idea that one swimmer could be so superior to everyone else that he literally never lost seemed to contradict how competitive sports actually worked. There's also the fact that some of Johnny's story has been embellished over the years. Like all legends, the tale grows in the telling. Some accounts have exaggerated certain details or added elements that didn't happen. This has caused skeptics to dismiss the entire story, assuming that if some parts were exaggerated, then all of it must be false. But the core facts, the ones that seemed most unbelievable, have been verified over and over again by historians, sports researchers, and film scholars. Johnny Weissmuller's life really was that extraordinary. What can we learn from Johnny Weissmuller's incredible story? First, that human potential is greater than we often imagine. Johnny didn't just excel in one area. He dominated swimming at a level never seen before, then successfully transitioned to becoming a movie star, then created an iconic character that has lasted for nearly a century. He did things that seemed impossible, and he did them with style and charisma. His story reminds us that limitations are often mental rather than physical. Second, that fame is fleeting and success doesn't guarantee happiness. Despite all his achievements, Johnny struggled in his personal life. His marriages failed. His money ran out. He ended his days far from the spotlight, his mind failing him. It's a reminder that we need to build a life beyond our accomplishments, to find meaning and connection that isn't dependent on being the best or the most famous. Third, Johnny's story shows us the power of authenticity. He succeeded as Tarzan because he wasn't pretending. He really could do the things Tarzan was supposed to do. He really was that athletic and comfortable in his body. Audiences responded to that authenticity. In a world of special effects and computer-generated imagery, there's still something powerful about watching a real human being do something extraordinary. Johnny Weissmuller was real, and that realness connected with people across generations and cultures. There are so many more stories we could tell about Johnny Weissmuller. The time he saved multiple people from drowning in actual rescue situations, using his swimming skills to pull people to safety. The friendships he made with other Hollywood legends. The impact he had on young people who saw his films and were inspired to become swimmers or athletes themselves. The charitable work he did, often quietly, using his fame to help others. The complexity of being so completely identified with one character that your own identity gets lost. Did Johnny sometimes wish people saw him as more than just Tarzan? Did he resent the yell that defined him, or did he embrace it? Different accounts suggest different answers, which means the truth was probably complicated, as it usually is with real people. What we do know for certain is that Johnny Weissmuller lived a life that most people can barely imagine. He achieved things that will likely never be equaled. He created something iconic that has outlasted him by decades and will continue long into the future. When you hear that Tarzan yell, you're hearing something that came from a real person who lived an extraordinary life. You're connecting with history, with achievement, with a time when one man really could dominate his sport completely, then become a movie star, then have adventures that included being saved by his own famous yell. It's all true. Every unbelievable part of it is true. The next time you watch an old Tarzan movie and see Johnny Weissmuller swinging through the trees, remember that you're not just watching an actor. You're watching the greatest swimmer in the world at that time. You're watching someone who never lost a race. You're watching someone who rode rhinoceroses and hippopotamuses for real. You're watching someone whose yell literally saved lives. You're watching someone whose accomplishments were so extraordinary that people thought they must be exaggerated or false, until they examined the evidence and realized every word was true. Johnny Weissmuller died nearly 40 years ago, but his legend continues to grow. New generations discover his films and his story. Swimmers still study his technique and marvel at his records. Film historians analyze his impact on Hollywood. And people around the world still imitate that famous yell, often without knowing the full story of the remarkable man who created it. That's immortality. That's legacy. That's what happens when you live a life so extraordinary that people literally don't believe it until they see the proof. Johnny Weissmuller was real. His achievements were real. His struggles were real. His legend is real. And now you know the truth about the man who seemed too incredible to be true, but was. So the next time someone tells you that something is impossible, that no one can dominate their field completely, that athletes can't become movie stars, that one person can't make that much of a difference, remember Johnny Weissmuller. Remember the immigrant child who became the fastest swimmer on Earth. Remember the athlete who never lost. Remember the movie star who rode rhinos and created an iconic character. Remember the man whose yell echoed through a Cuban golf course and saved his life. Remember that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that actually happened. Johnny Weissmuller proved that one person really can achieve the impossible, not just once, but over and over again throughout a lifetime. His story seemed too good to be true, but it was all true, every remarkable moment of it. And that's the most unbelievable thing of all.